Greetings. The other day, Vocab Malone shared some pictures relevant to the history of the Commandment Keepers. And among those images was this, a certificate noting the ordination of Wentworth Matthew as a rabbi. And it struck me as such an interesting historical item. I wanted to make a very quick video which documents it and goes over some of the details that I personally found intriguing. So there are a number of interesting features in this certificate, but the first thing that immediately stood out for me was the basmala at the top. You see, that's Arabic text which reads Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Now, that's a phrase that opens almost every single surah of the Quran. Now, of course, as a disclaimer, employing the basmala does not automatically make one a Muslim, but at the very least, it is curious, right? Moreover, it's worth noting that the one who put this certificate together and sent it to Wentworth Matthew was Josiah Ford. And with that in mind, it's worth noting that Howard Brotz wrote that towards the end of Ford's life, there were rumors and allegations that he had converted to Islam, that he had done so while he was in Ethiopia. Now, and yet another disclaimer, I'm not claiming that the use of the basmala in the certificate necessarily confirms those rumors, but it seems to potentially raise their plausibility, right? And with that in mind, it's worth noting also the letter that Ford sent with the certificate, as in the opening of that letter, Ford expressed his wish for, quote, the blessings of Allah, end quote, to be upon Wentworth Matthew. Now, of course, the use of the word Allah emphatically does not necessitate conversion to Islam. Lots of non-Muslims use the word Allah to refer to God. But at the very least, one can understand if the Israelites in New York who were receiving such letters from Ford might have thought that he became a Muslim. Now, whether he did or didn't, I don't know. I would propose that even if Ford didn't convert to Islam, such things might show that perhaps the Muslim population in Ethiopia had some influence on him. You see, he was living in Ethiopia at the end of his life. Now, that letter went on to discuss the certificate, asking Matthew's congregation to officially present it to him in a public gathering because, quote, the psychological effect would benefit everyone, end quote. I don't know, I thought that was interesting. Then his letter gives an explanation of the Arabic and Amharic text which appears on the certificate, stating that an Ethiopian Christian priest from Gondar was somehow involved with this certificate as well. Regarding that Amharic text, it was apparently intended to say, united within the love of God. I was able to make sense of or understand the second and third words, but because I have no familiarity with Amharic, I couldn't make sense of that first word. And with regard to that second word, when I initially saw it, I wrongly thought that the ge was missing from the word እግዚአብሔር, and I even said so on Twitter, but someone corrected me, and it turns out that this text is actually using a sort of calligraphic ligature which combines the ge with the z that follows it. So they're actually written together as a single character, a single ligature. And then there's the fine print at the bottom of the certificate. And one interesting detail there is that it gives a Hebrew calendar date for when the certificate was written. And the date given is the 12th of Sivan. Now, that's actually the date for the start of the modern state of Israel's Operation Solomon, which took place 60 years later in 1991. This letter was written in 1931. But in Operation Solomon, the modern state of Israel flew over 1,000 Ethiopian Jews out of Addis Ababa. And I find that intriguing because Josiah Ford was in Ethiopia because he apparently saw it as a sort of promised land or haven for American Israelites. You know, in the rest of his letter to Wentworth Matthew, Ford strongly encouraged Matthew to tell people to move to Ethiopia, and he went so far as to call it, quote, our only hope, our only salvation as a race, end quote. So in 1931, Ethiopia was seen by some Israelites who were in New York as the place to settle in. Yet Ford himself might have converted to Islam, and 6 decades after he wrote those words, the modern state of Israel was flying Ethiopian Jews out of Ethiopia. Now, as a disclaimer, that's not to say that there's necessarily a contradiction there. You know, perhaps one might argue that Ethiopia could be seen as a sort of stepping stone towards the ultimate destination, which would be Palestine. But it is nonetheless interesting, and Ford's rumored conversion to Islam does leave me wondering if perhaps other American Israelites who heeded his call to come to Ethiopia might have been absorbed into the country's Christian or Muslim populations. I don't know. One final detail that I found interesting was Ford's signature in the Hebrew cursive script, Harav Aleph Yesha'aya Ford, with Aleph apparently or presumably being the initial for his first name, Arnold. Now, what I thought was at least mildly interesting is that he wrote the Hebrew for Isaiah rather than the Hebrew for Josiah. Now, maybe that's a minor point, but I nonetheless found it interesting. I don't know if it reflects a desired name change or if he saw the names as, synonymous and interchangeable. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting. Whatever the case, that's all I wanted to show. This was, again, the certificate via which Josiah Ford bestowed the title of rabbi upon Wentworth Matthew back in 1931. And I hope you found it as interesting as I did. And as always, I welcome any comments, questions, or objections. So feel free to share your thoughts. And God bless.